Well, who better to talk to about this than one of the women who helped win that fantastic ruling? That's Susan Smith, Director of For Women Scotland. A very big welcome back to the show, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, there's no doubt at all that actually a big part of her downfall was her stance on the issue of, again, people talk about trans people. No, it was always actually about women's rights and being trampled on. And she was part of an SNP government that instituted some really quite, I mean, I would say borderline insane rules in terms of gender self-ID. And yes, by all means, let's a man who's, you know, who's raped 2 women, has been convicted of it, go into a women's prison because he's put on a wig and on his pink leggings you can see his meat and 2 veg on display, but he says he's a woman, so he must be. I mean, a level of madness that I think most British people, frankly, not willing to put up with. But she has finally spoken and given a reaction to the Supreme Court gender ruling, you know, quite some weeks on, but refused to apologise to women wronged by her ideology. And she has insisted, I think quite extraordinarily, that she had always campaigned for the protection and the enhancement of women's rights and had always recognised different views. Do recollections differ at For Women Scotland?
Yeah, this is historical revisionism at its finest, isn't it? She didn't want to listen to us. I mean, she's even blocked us on Twitter. This
of course
is
she has.
how.
Well, it's all that abuse you send us, Susan. You know.
It definitely is. All those things like we can't have penises. She has created this narrative, and I don't know why she thinks anyone's going to buy it, because she never spoke up for women's rights. And, you know, politicians have different priorities. Hers was presumably independence, although I know some people question that as well. But she didn't have to be at the forefront of women's rights. But she shouldn't pretend now that she was when she sought actively to destroy them.
Yeah.
And she wasn't interested in our views. We didn't get in the door with ministers. She just spoke to the paid lobby groups who all agreed with her. She surrounded herself with this circle, the National Advisory Council, who she had selected, and they told her what to do, and they all patted each other on the back and said, "Isn't this marvellous? We're seeking diverse views," but they weren't interested in what ordinary women thought, and they certainly weren't interested in what the kind of women who were locked up in prison with these awful murderers or women in needing rape crisis services. She didn't have any care for what they thought.
It really was extraordinary, especially as she was happy to play along with the whole first Minister of Scotland and go on about that and play that card for to women in privilege and power doing rather better than the women you were talking about there. But this, I mean, it was part of her downfall. Of course, there was also the criminal investigation into her husband and other leading figures in the SNP as well. Of course, the history she had with the former leader, the late Alex Salmond as well. There's lots going on there. But I think for most people, this was such a key issue over this. And it is extraordinary the reaction of many of the great and the good who have decried women activists simply talking about standing up for women's legal rights, fought for and enshrined in law for a long time to be protected from the encroachment of men who claim to think that they are women. That's as far as we can go with who those people are. And the abuse of women, transphobic, bigoted. I believe Nicola Sturgeon once threw out racist and homophobic at women's rights groups as well. I don't know where that even came from. That came quite bizarre. But she's, of course, not the only leader who's been like this. I mean, Keir Starmer has accepted the ruling, and we're told by Number 10 that he does now accept that it's not 99.9% of women who don't have a penis. It's actually 100%. He hasn't said it himself. He said trans women are women. He said not everyone, some women have a penis. But it's incredible how many of the people, the organisations, the politicians in particular, who have pushed this issue as a sort of religious zealotry view for quite a few years now, 10, 12 years, are not willing to relent that easily.
Yeah, and I don't mind, if politicians step back and say, OK, fair play, I was wrong, I got it wrong, and the Supreme Court said this, and now let's all have a proper conversation and we'll talk to these women who were calling bigots last week. But yeah. I can work with that. What I cannot work with is somebody who is refusing to accept she was wrong, who was actually casting aspersions on the Supreme Court. Yeah. Hers was just the slightly more politely worded version of what Maggie Chapman of the Greens was doing the other week, which was quite appalling. I don't know if you saw that. She was out ranting on the streets saying that the Supreme Court, there was bigotry, hatred and prejudice coming from the Supreme Court. And I think Nicola Sturgeon's response is a slightly more diplomatically worded way of saying that.
But she's still hoping for a job on the international scene. So, you know, she's got to play along with all of the latest woke madness. I'll tell you what's more important, though, than politicians saying I was wrong. And again, I do still have an issue, even if, you know, she and Keir Starmer and all the rest of them all said I was completely wrong. I still don't understand why a Supreme Court judge saying men aren't women and women aren't men and women can't become men and men can't become women. I don't know why that would change your view. If you honestly have believed that all this time, I don't know why your view would change. So I don't think they ever really believed it. Remember, they were lying to us all the time and calling us all bigots and transphobes, even though they knew what we were saying was true. Again, they're either stupid, they're either insane, or they were lying. All three should preclude you from public office.
I think they were... they didn't believe it. And I think the other thing is that a lot of them were scared of these activists.
Well, you know what? Sod them. Because they came for you. I mean, they attempted to come for me, but that stuff wore off duck's back. I've dealt with worse abuse than those lot. But no, I lost loads of work. I'm quite happy to. Someone doesn't employ me because I don't pretend to believe nonsense. I don't want to work for them anyway. But the abuse that people like you got, abuse that J.K. Rowling gets, you know, Maya Forstater, I mean, Sharon Davies, amazing women campaigning on this issue. Some of the men, Graham Linehan and others, losing work. But the idea that these politicians say, oh, I was scared, doesn't wash. Sorry.
Well, it doesn't, because they should have shown courage and political leadership. I want politicians who can stand up for what's right. That's their job.
Yeah, exactly. But also, if you're willing to lie about something like that that's so blatantly obviously not true, what else are you lying about? And that's the big worry. Let's talk, though, about, you know, women in the real world right now who are still dealing with this. Because I remember saying on the day, you know, we'll see whether this actually plays out or not. Supreme Court ruling is very, very clear. If you have a single-sex facility, whether it's a refuge, whether it's a hospital ward, whether it's a lesbian dating group that says, you know, it's single-sex, lesbians by definition single-sex, then you cannot allow men who claim to be women in those safe places. Does seem to me an awful lot of organisations are saying, nah, not playing along, whether it's, you know, theatres, whether it's NHS hospitals extraordinarily, whether it's numerous other bodies who are just simply saying, we are simply not going to change our policy. Particularly, I think it's an issue, and Sex Matters, the women's rights group, has raised this with the dozens of NHS trusts who are blatantly, right now, breaking the law. Not just, it hasn't changed. The law is as it was. It was being wrongly interpreted. That if it's a single-sex ward, or if it's a women's toilet or changing room, whether for staff or for patients, it must be for women only and not men who claim to be women. What's going to happen in those hospitals, though?
Well, I think they're going to have to go back to court, and we've said, you know, if people want to go to court, we're all for it. Kind of bring it.
But you're going to win.
Yes. And they are going to win. And it's going to start to get expensive for organisations. And I think you can see the more sensible organisations like Barclays, who probably don't want employees turning up and suing the pants off them, going, actually, you know what, we will abide by the law. But even before we won this case, these organisations were acting unlawfully because self-ID has never been the law. Yeah. And it's organisations like Stonewall who have lied and are continuing to lie. Yep. And the Scottish government are still not getting rid of Stonewall. So they are still allowing them in to give guidance.
Taxpayers are paying for them to give advice. It's against the law. But also, I mean, we've seen the police. I mean, the police chief's organisation basically saying, well, we're going to move slowly on this about whether or not we allow basically men dressed as women, calling themselves Sheila, to strip search a woman prisoner or suspect. I mean, it is just untenable. We need direction from the Prime Minister. He needs to say, this is the law. You need to change your policies by next Sunday, and that's the end of the matter.
And you know what's probably even more likely to happen with the police is that they're going to arrest another Isla Bryson, and he's going to insist a female police officer strip search him. And if they don't change the policies to abide by the law, they're going to be in trouble, because that police officer will have very good grounds to sue them for all sorts of things, including sexual assault. And we'd all be right behind her,
absolutely.
obviously.
By the way, though, all of these, when there is a payout, if it's a public body, all of those fines, all of those court costs, all paid for by us, the taxpayer.
Right.
And I want everyone involved who fights these and doesn't change. But again, I want them all sacked. There needs to be a penalty for refusing to obey the law, especially when you're in a public institution.
We've said government, especially the Scottish government, funds all these organisations that are lying about the law, and we want them to stop funding them. And we don't think that should be difficult. They're claiming it's so impossible to do, but they wouldn't allow it in any other sector.
Well, you know, that's just you being bigoted again, Susan. What can I say? Susan Smith, you are fabulous. You're Director for Women Scotland. Thank you so much. Oh, great work you've done. I love the confidence. I love the, you know what? We've won now, and we are going to make sure that law is enforced. Susan Smith, thank you so much. Claire Pearsall smiling through all of that. It's just extraordinary. Police, NHS, loads of public bodies just saying, we're just not going to obey the law. I don't think you get an option.
Well, you don't, and you wouldn't do it in any other sphere. You wouldn't do it with any other law. And if anybody was on my side, I'd want it to be Susan and her gang.
Oh, my God.
I really do. I think they're awesome, and they've done such great work.
Oh, they really have. We salute you.
Yes.
We salute you.